The conference room filled up quickly as officers filed in for the mandatory department meeting. Cooper and Wilson, still riding high from their morning's entertainment, grabbed seats in the front row. They were busy retelling their stories to anyone who would listen, earning a few laughs and several uncomfortable glances. "Man, you should have seen her face when we sent her to the storage closet," Cooper was saying, not bothering to keep his voice down. Wilson added, "Yeah, bet she's still wandering around somewhere." Their laughter died down as the outgoing Chief Richards walked to the podium, his expression unusually serious. The room fell silent as Chief Richards cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, after 30 years of service, I'm retiring next week." He paused, looking around the room. "Today, I have the honor of introducing your new chief of police." Cooper leaned over to Wilson, whispering loud enough for nearby officers to hear, "Bet it's that guy from the 52nd. Wilson nodded. "Yeah, heard he's tough but fair." They settled back in their chairs, confident in their assumptions. Chief Richards continued, "Your new chief brings 20 years of experience, with an impressive record of reducing crime rates and improving community relations in 3 different cities." He gestured toward the side door. "Please welcome your new chief of police." The door opened, and Andrea walked in. But she wasn't wearing civilian clothes anymore. She was dressed in full uniform, her chief stars gleaming on her collar, rows of commendation medals decorating her chest. The room fell into stunned silence. Cooper's coffee cup slipped from his hand, spilling across the floor. Wilson's face turned pale, his mouth hanging open. Neither of them moved to clean up the spilled coffee. Behind them, several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others sat up straighter, suddenly very alert. Lisa Chen, sitting in the back, couldn't hide her smile. A few other officers were desperately trying to remember if they had interacted with Andrea that morning, and if so, how they had treated her. Chief Richards stepped aside, and Andrea took her place at the podium. Her eyes swept across the room, pausing briefly on Cooper and Wilson, who seemed to be trying to sink into their chairs. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I believe some of you have already shown me around the precinct this morning." The silence in the room was deafening. Someone in the back coughed nervously. Cooper and Wilson stared straight ahead, their faces a mix of shock and horror as they realized all their jokes and comments had been heard by their new boss. "I've spent the morning observing this precinct," Andrea continued. "I've seen how you treat each other, how you treat civilians, and how you approach your duties." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've seen exactly what needs to change." Several officers glanced at Cooper and Wilson, who had gone from being the morning's entertainment to the precinct's cautionary tale in a matter of seconds. Lisa Chen sat up straighter, hope visible on her face as she watched her new chief command the room. "Starting today," Andrea announced, "things will be different at the 34th Precinct. Merit will matter more than seniority. Respect will be non-negotiable. And discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated." Her eyes met Cooper's, then Wilson's. "Some of you have already given me a very clear demonstration of what needs to change." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Officers who had laughed at Cooper and Wilson's jokes earlier were now studying their shoes intently. Those who had stayed silent during the morning's events were wondering if their silence made them equally guilty. Andrea spread her hands on the podium, leaning forward slightly. "I believe in second chances," she said, her voice firm, but not unkind. "But I also believe in accountability. Those who aren't ready to embrace change might want to consider other career options." As her words settled over the room, Cooper and Wilson exchanged glances, finally understanding the full impact of their morning's behavior. Their comfortable world had indeed been turned upside down, and this was only the beginning. The morning sun had just begun to peek through the large glass windows of Atlanta International Airport, casting long shadows across the polished floors. A well-dressed woman in her mid-30s pulled her carry-on suitcase, her heels clicking confidently against the airport tiles. Dr. Maya Patel was running perfectly on time, as usual. As one of the country's leading cardiothoracic surgeons, she had mastered the art of precise timing. She glanced at her watch, 7:15 a.m. Her flight to Chicago was scheduled for 8:00 a.m., giving her plenty of time to grab her favorite green tea latte from the airport cafe. The barista recognized her, greeting her with a warm smile. The usual, "Doc?" Maya nodded, grateful for these small moments of familiarity in her busy life. While waiting for her drink, she mentally reviewed her presentation for the medical conference. She had spent months preparing research on a groundbreaking minimally invasive surgical technique that could significantly reduce recovery time for heart patients. Her work had already saved countless lives, and sharing it with other surgeons meant even more people could benefit. The airport was starting to buzz with early morning travelers. Business people hurried past with their briefcases, families herded sleepy children toward their gates, and flight crews walked by in crisp uniforms. Maya loved these moments of watching life unfold around her. Despite flying at least twice a month for various medical conferences and surgeries, she never tired of the electric energy of airports. She pulled out her first-class ticket. A small luxury she allowed herself after years of hard work through medical school, residency, and establishing her practice. The gold frequent flyer card in her wallet had been earned through countless hours in the air, flying to help patients across the country who needed her expertise. Making her way to Gate B7, Maya exchanged pleasant smiles with the ground staff who recognized her from her regular flights. She had always believed in treating everyone with kindness, from the cleaning staff to the CEO of her hospital. That's what her parents had taught her growing up in their small family restaurant. Respect and hard work were the foundations of success. As she settled into a seat near the gate, Maya opened her laptop to review some patient files. A young mother struggling with a baby stroller caught her attention. Without hesitation, she got up to help, carefully lifting the front wheels over the carpet edge while the grateful mother smiled in thanks. These small acts of kindness were second nature to her. The gate area gradually filled with other passengers. Maya noticed a few other doctors she recognized from previous conferences, exchanging professional nods. She overheard snippets of conversations. A grandmother excited to meet her first grandchild, a businessman discussing quarterly reports, a couple planning their honeymoon. Each person had their own story, their own reason for being there that morning. When the first boarding call came, Maya gathered her belongings, double-checking she had everything: her presentation materials, medical journals, and the small photo of her family she always carried for good luck. The flight attendant at the desk greeted passengers with practiced efficiency, scanning boarding passes and checking IDs. Everything seemed normal, just another routine morning at the airport. Little did Maya know that in the next few minutes, her ordinary morning would turn into something completely unexpected, challenging not just her patients, but also the very principles of dignity and respect she had built her life around. As she stood in line, ready to board, she couldn't have imagined how this flight would become a turning point, not just for her, but for countless others who would come after her. The boarding process started smoothly. Maya waited patiently in the first-class line, scrolling through messages from her surgical team back at the hospital. The sweet scent of her green tea latte still lingered as she took one final sip before tucking the empty cup into a nearby recycling bin. As passengers filed onto the plane, the flight attendants greeted everyone with professional smiles. Maya noticed the captain standing near the cockpit door, checking something on his tablet. Captain Robert Stevens was a tall man with graying temples and a stern expression that seemed permanently etched onto his face. He smiled and chatted briefly with some passengers while barely acknowledging others. When Maya reached the front of the line, she noticed an immediate change in the captain's demeanor. His smile disappeared, replaced by a look she knew all too well, one she'd faced countless times throughout her career, but had hoped to see less of in 2024. He stepped forward, blocking her path to the first-class cabin. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass?" Captain Stevens asked, his tone notably different from the friendly one he used with previous passengers. Maya calmly pulled out her ticket, along with her frequent flyer card and ID, a habit she developed over years of flying. "There must be some mistake," he said, studying her documents with exaggerated scrutiny. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Other passengers began to slow down behind her, creating a small traffic jam in the jet bridge. Maya could feel their eyes on her back, hear their whispered conversations. "Yes, I'm sure," Maya replied professionally, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Seat 2A, first class. I fly this route regularly for medical conferences." She pointed to her frequent flyer status card, which clearly showed her elite status. The captain cleared his throat. "Well, there seems to be a situation with the seating arrangement. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy today. We can discuss compensation for the difference." His words were polite, but his meaning was clear as glass. A few passengers behind Maya started shifting uncomfortably. Some pulled out their phones, sensing the situation unfolding before them. An elderly gentleman who had been seated in first class actually stood up, his face reddening with embarrassment at witnessing such behavior. Maya took a deep breath, drawing on years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room. "Captain Stevens," she said, reading his name tag, "I've been a frequent flyer with this airline for over a decade. My ticket and seat assignment are valid. Is there a specific reason you're questioning my seating arrangement?" The captain's face hardened. He began a lengthy explanation about airline policies and passenger comfort, words that made no sense given the situation. A flight attendant nearby looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between Maya and her supervisor with evident concern. Just then, movement at the back of the line caught Maya's attention. Her husband, who had stopped to help an elderly couple with their bags, was making his way forward. Dr. Raj Patel, a respected civil rights attorney, had seen this scene play out too many times in his career. His normally gentle expression was replaced by one of determined professionalism. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Other passengers had stopped pretending not to watch, and the quiet murmur of disapproval was growing louder. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about dignity, respect, and the kind of world people wanted to live in. As Rad approached, Captain Stevens straightened his posture, perhaps sensing that this situation was about to take an unexpected turn. The next few moments would prove crucial, not just for Maya and Raj, but for everyone watching. A reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right means standing your ground, even when others try to push you away. Maya stood her ground at the entrance to first class, her heart beating steadily despite the growing tension. She'd spent too many years earning respect in operating rooms to back down now. The morning light streaming through the airplane windows cast strange shadows across Captain Stevens' face as he continued to create obstacles that existed only in his mind. "Perhaps there's been a mix-up with the booking system," he suggested, his voice carrying a hint of condescension that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We sometimes see these computer errors." He emphasized the last words while barely glancing at the perfectly valid ticket in his hand. A young flight attendant named Amy hovered nearby, clearly distressed by the situation. She had already verified Maya's ticket during the initial boarding process and knew there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. Her hands fidgeted with her uniform as she gathered the courage to speak up. "Captain," Amy ventured carefully, "I've checked the passenger manifest. Dr. Patel's reservation is completely in order." Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood firm. This small act of allyship didn't go unnoticed by the other passengers, some of whom were now openly recording the incident on their phones. Captain Stevens turned to Amy with a sharp look. "I'm handling this situation," he said curtly. Turning back to Maya, he continued, "You see, first class has certain standards we need to maintain. The implications in his tone made several passengers gasp audibly. An older businessman in seat 3C stood up, his face flushed with anger. "I've been flying first class for 20 years, he announced loudly, and the only standard I see being violated right now is common decency. Others murmured in agreement, the tension in the cabin rising like a tide. Maya maintained her professional composure, though her hands gripped her laptop bag a little tighter. "Captain Stevens," she said calmly, her voice carrying the same authority she used in the operating room. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon heading to Chicago to present at a medical conference. I've flown this route dozens of times. There's nothing wrong with my ticket, and we both know it." The captain's face reddened slightly, but he pressed on. "Well, if you just step aside for now, we can sort this out after everyone else is seated." He gestured toward the economy section, as if the mere suggestion would make her forget her rights. More passengers had stopped in the aisle now, creating a backup that stretched into the jet bridge. Phone cameras continued recording, documenting every word and gesture. A mother covered her young daughter's ears, whispering something that made the child's eyes grow wide with understanding. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier with each passing moment. The air conditioning hummed overhead, a stark contrast to the heated situation below. Maya could feel sweat forming on her back, but her voice remained steady as she responded, "No, Captain Stevens. I won't step aside. My ticket is valid, my seat is assigned, and any delay in this flight's departure is solely due to your actions, not mine." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Several passengers nodded in approval, while others whispered among themselves. A teenager in economy called out, "This is going straight to TikTok," causing a ripple of nervous laughter that quickly died down as Captain Stevens shot him a stern look. Just then, the sound of determined footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. Maya's husband Raj appeared at the cabin entrance, his normally gentle expression replaced by the focused look he wore in courtrooms. He assessed the situation quickly, noting the phone's recording, the captain's defensive posture, and his wife's dignified stance. The next few moments would prove crucial. As Raj stepped forward, briefcase in hand and law degree practically radiating from his confident stride, everyone in the cabin seemed to hold their breath. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about taking a stand against everyday injustice, about refusing to let someone's prejudices dictate your worth. The ground supervisor arrived quickly, her heels clicking purposefully down the jet bridge. Mrs. Chen was a veteran airline employee who had worked her way up from flight attendant to supervisor over 20 years. One look at the scene, the recording phones, the tense captain, and the professional couple standing their ground, told her everything she needed to know. "Captain Stevens, could you step aside with me for a moment?" Mrs. Chen's voice was calm, but carried unmistakable authority. She gestured toward the jet bridge, away from the growing audience of passengers. The captain hesitated, his uniform suddenly seeming too tight around his neck. "I was just following standard procedures," he began, but Mrs. Chen cut him off with a raised hand. "Not here," she said firmly. "And Dr. Patel," she turned to Maya, "I apologize for any inconvenience. Please take your assigned seat. We'll sort this out immediately." Her genuine smile and respectful tone provided a stark contrast to the captain's earlier behavior. Raj stepped forward, tablet still in hand. "Mrs. Chen, I believe you should know that multiple passengers have recorded evidence of discriminatory behavior." He spoke quietly, ensuring his words wouldn't carry through the cabin. "As an attorney specializing in civil rights, I can't ignore what happened here." A young boy in economy called out, "The video already has 100 likes." His mother quickly shushed him, but the comment made Captain Stevens' face turn an even deeper shade of red. Mrs. Chen nodded gravely. "I understand completely, sir. Rest assured, this will be handled appropriately." She turned to the other passengers, raising her voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll have a new flight crew here shortly." A murmur of approval rippled through the cabin. The businessmen in 3C actually clapped, starting a small wave of applause that quickly spread through first class and into economy. Amy, the flight attendant who had stood up for what was right, smiled broadly. "Dr. Patel, can I get you anything while we wait? Perhaps some fresh tea." The simple offer of normal, respectful service nearly brought tears to Maya's eyes. Raj placed his tablet back in his briefcase, adding, "Mrs. Chen, we'll need copies of all relevant incident reports. I'll also be filing a formal complaint with the FAA." His tone remained professional, focused on proper procedures rather than revenge. Captain Stevens tried one last time to defend himself. "You don't understand the pressures we're under." But Mrs. Chen silenced him with a look that could have frozen hot coffee. "The only pressure here, Captain, is the pressure to treat every passenger with dignity and respect," she stated firmly. "Now please follow me." The authority in her voice left no room for argument. As they left, the elderly woman sitting in first class reached out and squeezed Maya's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "My daughter's a pilot, and it's because people like you stood up that she got her wings." The atmosphere in the cabin began to shift from tension to triumph. Passengers started sharing their own stories. Of times they witnessed discrimination. Of times they wished they'd spoken up. Of times they did. What had started as an ugly incident was transforming into a moment of community and connection. A new captain arrived within 15 minutes, her professionalism and warm greeting setting a completely different tone. As she walked past Maya's seat, she paused briefly. "I hear you're a cardiothoracic surgeon," she said with genuine interest. "My mother had heart surgery last year. Thank you for the work you do." The morning sun now streamed fully through the airplane windows, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. What could have been just another story of discrimination had become something more. A reminder that when people stand together against injustice, positive change is possible. The next 30 minutes on the plane buzzed with activity. While the new flight crew prepared for takeoff, Mrs. Chen efficiently handled the situation with the kind of grace that comes from years of experience. She sat in the empty seat across from Maya and Raj, her notebook open and pen ready. "I want to document everything exactly as it happened," she explained, her fingers flying across her tablet's screen. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about making sure it never happens again." Her dedication was clear in every word she typed, every detail she verified. Meanwhile, passengers from both first class and economy shared their video recordings with Raj. The teenage boy, who had been tracking the social media response, raised his hand from his seat. Excuse me? The video's gone viral. There's already a news station asking for permission to use it." Mrs. Chen looked up from her tablet. "The airline's PR team is already preparing a statement. But more importantly, we're taking immediate action." She turned to Maya and Raj. "We'd like to invite both of you to be part of our new passenger advocacy board. Your experience and expertise could help us make real changes." The flight attendant Amy brought fresh tea for everyone involved, her hand steady now that justice was being served. "I've worked here for 3 years," she shared quietly. "I've seen things like this before, but never had the courage to speak up. Today changed that for me." A gentle tap on Maya's shoulder came from the elderly woman behind her. "My daughter's going to be so inspired by this story," she said, her eyes bright. "She's in medical school now. People like you show her what's possible." The new captain, a woman with salt and pepper hair named Captain Lee, emerged from the cockpit. "We're ready for departure, but first," she cleared her throat. "Dr. Patel, would you be willing to speak at our next pilot training session? Personal stories like yours make a bigger impact than any policy manual." Raj checked his phone, which had been buzzing continuously. "The airline's legal team has already reached out," he mentioned to Mrs. Chen. "They're proposing a complete overhaul of their diversity training program. They want this to be a turning point." The businessman from 3C leaned forward. I sit on several corporate boards, he offered. If you're serious about making changes, I'd be happy to connect you with diversity consultants who can help implement new policies. Maya looked around the cabin, taking in all the supportive faces. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I became a surgeon, some people said I didn't belong there either. But every time someone stands up against discrimination, they make the path a little easier for those who come after. Mrs. Chen nodded, adding one final note to her report. Captain Stevens has been suspended pending a full investigation. But more importantly, this incident has pushed us to fast-track several inclusion initiatives we've been considering. The plane's engines hummed to life as Captain Lee made the final preparations for takeoff. The morning sun had fully risen now, streaming through the windows and highlighting the faces of everyone who had witnessed this moment of change. Amy made one last round through the cabin, checking seatbelts. You know, she said to Maya, I think everyone on this flight will remember today. Not because of what went wrong, but because of how it was made right. As the plane began to taxi, Mrs. Chen gathered her materials. We'll be in touch about the advocacy board, she promised. Sometimes it takes one moment of courage to spark real change. Today was that moment. The passengers settled into their seats, many still quietly discussing what they'd witnessed. What had started as an attempt to deny someone their rightful place had transformed into a catalyst for positive change, proving that justice, when pursued with dignity and determination, could lead to something greater than anyone expected. By the time Maya's plane landed in Chicago, the incident had taken on a life of its own. Her phone lit up with messages as soon as she turned it on. The teenager's video had indeed gone viral, reaching millions of views across different social media platforms. But what happened next showed how one moment of standing up for what's right could create waves of positive change. The airline's CEO had called an emergency meeting that very afternoon. Pictures showed dozens of executives in their corporate headquarters, all gathered around a long table, watching the viral video on a large screen. The looks on their faces told the whole story. This wasn't just bad publicity. This was a wake-up call. Back at the Atlanta airport, the story spread through the terminal like wildfire. Other passengers from the flight shared their versions with waiting travelers, who then shared it with others. A group of flight attendants gathered during their break, discussing how they could better support each other in standing up against discrimination. Mrs. Chen's phone hadn't stopped ringing. News outlets wanted statements, but she was more focused on action than words. She'd already drafted a new training program, pulling in elements from her 20 years of experience. We're not just going to talk about change, she told her team. We're going to make it happen. The airline's response came swiftly and decisively. By evening, they'd announced a complete review of their training procedures. But they didn't stop there. They created a new position, Chief Diversity Officer, with real power to make changes. The job posting went up that same day. In the hospital where Maya worked, her colleagues gathered around computers, watching the video and sharing their own stories. A young medical student approached her mentor, tears in her eyes. I was afraid to apply for the surgical program, she admitted. But seeing Dr. Patel stand her ground, it gives me hope. Raj's law office became a hub of activity. Other lawyers reached out, sharing similar cases and offering to help create guidelines for other airlines. This isn't about one incident, Raj explained to his team. It's about changing the whole system. The flight attendant Amy received a special commendation for speaking up. Her story inspired other airline employees to share their experiences. The company set up an anonymous reporting system where staff could safely report discrimination without fear of punishment. Social media kept buzzing. The hashtag #RespectAnthisFees started trending. People shared their own stories of facing discrimination while traveling, but also stories of standing up against it. Each share, each comment, each like showed that people were ready for change. The businessman from first class kept his promise. He connected the airline with top diversity consultants, and soon workshops were being planned for every level of the company, from baggage handlers to board members. Change has to happen at every level, he insisted during a planning meeting. Local schools reached out to Maya, asking her to speak to their students about standing up for what's right. One teacher told her, "Our kids need to see that being professional and standing up for yourself aren't opposite things. They go hand in hand." The elderly woman from the flight sent Maya a photo of her daughter in medical school with a note saying, "Your courage gives courage to others." The picture found a place on Maya's office wall, a reminder of why standing up matters. Even the airport staff got involved. Security teams revised their training. Gate agents attended special workshops. The coffee shop where Maya got her morning tea put up a sign reading, "Everyone welcome here," in multiple languages. As evening fell on that eventful day, Maya sat in her hotel room in Chicago, preparing for her medical conference presentation. Her phone buzzed with another message. The airline's board of directors wanted her to help shape their new inclusion policies. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. 1 month after the incident, the airline's main training center buzzed with activity. The walls, once bare except for safety posters, now displayed messages about inclusion and respect in bright, welcoming colors. New employees sat in redesigned training sessions, watching real-world scenarios and learning how to handle difficult situations. Mrs. Chen stood at the front of the room, pointing to a presentation slide. "Today's lesson isn't just about rules," she explained to the fresh batch of flight attendants. "It's about treating every passenger with dignity." The trainees took notes eagerly, many of them having seen the viral video that sparked these changes. In the break room, Amy had become something of a hero. Newer staff members would seek her advice, asking how to find the courage to speak up. "You know," she'd tell them, "doing the right thing feels scary at first, but it gets easier every time." The airline's corporate offices had transformed too. The new chief diversity officer, a woman with 30 years of experience in civil rights work, had taken over an entire floor. Her team worked tirelessly, reviewing policies and implementing changes that went far beyond simple training videos. "Look at this," she said during a board meeting, showing statistics on her tablet. "Passenger complaints about discrimination have dropped by 40% since we started our new programs." The board members nodded approvingly, realizing that doing the right thing was also good for business. The changes spread throughout the airport. Security teams attended monthly workshops led by diversity experts. Gate agents practiced scenarios dealing with difficult situations. Even the cleaning staff received training on reporting discriminatory behavior they might witness. The airline's website underwent a complete makeover. A new section appeared, titled, "Our Commitment to All Passengers." It wasn't just empty words. It included specific policies, reporting procedures, and real stories of positive changes. The booking system now included options for passengers to note any special assistance they might need, making travel easier for everyone. In the flight crew briefing rooms, new protocols hung on the walls. "If you see something wrong, speak up," the posters read. Below them, a QR code linked to the anonymous reporting system that had already helped identify and address several instances of bias. The impact reached beyond just one airline. Other carriers started calling, asking about the new training programs. Industry magazines wrote articles about the changes. Small regional airlines began adopting similar policies, creating a ripple effect across the entire industry. Back in the training center, Mrs. Chen introduced a special guest speaker, the elderly woman from the flight who had thanked Maya. She shared stories from her 50 years of flying, showing how far things had come and how far they still needed to go. The room fell silent as she spoke, her words touching hearts and opening minds. The airline's social media team started sharing weekly stories of positive interactions between staff and passengers. Simple moments of kindness, respect, and understanding became celebrated examples of the company's new culture. Comments poured in from around the world, with people sharing their own experiences of positive change. In the employee lounge, a suggestion box filled up daily with ideas for further improvements. What if we offered cultural sensitivity training in multiple languages? One note suggested. How about creating a mentorship program for new employees? Asked another. Each suggestion was seriously considered, showing that change came from every level. The airline's quarterly report included a new section on inclusion metrics. Numbers told the story of progress. Increased employee satisfaction, better passenger feedback, fewer complaints. But the real changes showed in the small, daily interactions, in the smiles exchanged between staff and passengers, in the confident way employees handled difficult situations, in the feeling of welcome that greeted every traveler. As the sun set on another busy day at the airport, Mrs. Chen watched a new flight crew heading to their plane. You know, she said to a colleague, sometimes the biggest changes start with just one person willing to stand up for what's right. 6 months after that memorable flight, Maya sat in her office looking at a special wall she'd created. Photos, letters, and news clippings covered it from top to bottom, each telling part of a bigger story. Her eyes landed on a recent newspaper headline, Airline Industry Transforms. How one moment sparked nationwide change. Below her medical certificates hung a new edition, an award from a civil rights organization recognizing her courage that day. But what made her smile most were the letters. Hundreds of them had poured in from around the country, each sharing a personal story of inspiration. Dear Dr. Patel, one letter began, written in slightly shaky handwriting. I'm 12 years old, and I want to be a pilot. When my teacher showed us the video of what happened to you, I learned that it's okay to stand up for yourself while staying professional. Thank you for showing me how. The airline had completely transformed. Their new training center, named the Unity Center, had become a model for other companies. Airlines from different countries sent their staff there to learn. The walls displayed photos from that important day, reminding everyone that change often starts with one person saying no to discrimination. Mrs. Chen had been promoted to head of customer experience. Her office door always stayed open, welcoming anyone who needed to report concerns. Remember, she often said in her speeches, true change happens when everyone feels safe enough to speak up. Amy, the flight attendant who first stood up to help, now led her own training sessions. I was scared that day, she would tell her classes. But doing the right thing is often scary at first. That's how you know it matters. The elderly woman who had thanked Maya that day had started a mentorship program for young girls interested in aviation. Every weekend, she would take them to the airport, showing them the planes and introducing them to female pilots. See that cockpit? She would say. That could be your office one day. Raj's law firm had created a special department focused on transportation equality. They offered free legal advice to passengers who faced discrimination, ensuring that everyone knew their rights. Their website included a simple guide titled Know Your Rights in the Sky, downloaded thousands of times each month. The businessman from first class had kept his promise too. His connections led to the creation of an industry-wide council on inclusion. Companies shared their best practices, worked together on solving problems, and celebrated their successes. Competition stops at the door became their motto. We're all in this together. Social media hadn't forgotten either. The original video had sparked a movement. People shared their own stories using hashtag #RespectAnthesFees, creating a huge online community. Each story added another voice to the chorus calling for change. Maya's hospital noticed changes too. More young people from different backgrounds applied to their medical program, many mentioning her story in their applications. You showed us that we belong everywhere, one applicant wrote, even in places where some people might think we don't. The teenage boy who first posted the video had started a school club focused on social justice. They met weekly, discussing ways to make positive changes in their community. His video project about standing up against discrimination won first prize at the state competition. Late one evening, as Maya prepared to board another flight to Chicago, a young flight attendant recognized her. "You know," she said quietly, "I joined the airline because of what happened that day. I wanted to be part of the change." Maya smiled, remembering how one difficult morning had turned into something so much bigger. As she settled into her seat, she noticed the airline's new motto printed on the safety card: "Everyone's journey matters." Simple words, but they carried the weight of real change. The sun set outside her window, painting the sky in beautiful colors. Sometimes, she thought, the most important moments in life aren't the big, planned ones. They're the moments when you choose to stand up for what's right, not knowing how far those ripples of change will travel.